Hello, I'm Sarah and welcome to my channel. Today's video, I'm just going to talk about how I am able to read so much. My first tip is to always listen to the audiobooks. So if I'm reading a book, I will always listen to the audiobook alongside reading. I will never just read a book by itself unless there's no audiobook for it. I find that listening to the audiobook gives me less of a chance to be distracted by other things, such as like the noise that are happening around me or my thoughts, because I'm too focused on listening to my audiobook and reading that I don't have the opportunity to hear something else to be distracted by it. My next tip is to listen to an audiobook anytime you're doing any chores or anything like that. Like, I will listen to an audiobook while I'm folding laundry. I'll listen to it while I'm taking my daily walk or taking out the trash or washing dishes or just general cleaning, just because I find that things like that, I have my ears free. So what I do is I listen to the audiobook while I'm doing all of my chores. That way I'm kind of getting my reading in, but I feel like I'm not wasting my time by not reading because I am listening to my audiobook. And to go alongside with that, if I'm not doing chores, I do try to find things that don't use too much brain power to do while listening. So for example, I'll do one of those sticker by number books, or I'll color, or I will find like a mindless phone game that I don't necessarily have to think too much about. That way, while I'm doing those things, I am getting some reading in. Another thing I find audiobooks really useful for is to train yourself on how to read faster. When I first started listening to audiobooks, I would listen to them at 2x speed and it would be way too fast. And that's while I'm reading along. So what I did was I would read along with it at 2x speed, and then I would bump it up to the next level and I would try and read along with that. And once I got the hang of that, I'd bump it up to 2.5 and then 2.75 and 3. I wasn't doing it all in like the same book. So I would read along, and once I felt like I could keep up with the audiobook, I would bump up the speed a little bit. That way it's a little bit of a challenge. And I am now at the point where I can read along with my audiobook at 3.5 speed, and it's not that difficult for me. My next tip is to put your distractions completely out of reach, so you'd have to like get up to get it. So if, let's say I'm sitting here and reading, I will put my phone on the other side of the room, just because I will get so distracted if it's just sitting next to me and I have a notification or something like that. I find that if I put it somewhere where I would have to get up to grab it, I'm less likely to pick it up in the first place because I don't want to get up because I'm lazy. My next tip is to find when you want to read the most and try to read as much as you can during that time. For me personally, I prefer to read late at night before I go to bed. Once the lights are out, my book light's on, and I will sit there and read until I can't keep my eyes open anymore. And sometimes I stay up until 3 a.m. finishing my book. Sometimes I can only read for like about an hour before I get tired. Alternatively, it's also important to find out when you don't want to read the most and try to avoid reading then. I don't like reading first thing in the morning. I've been awake for over an hour and I haven't even picked up my book yet, because if I start reading now, I'm just not going to want to read, and I'm just going to get distracted and not pay attention. My next tip is, if you are competitive, try and set a daily goal for yourself. I personally set my goal for 8 audiobook hours a day. That's completely attainable for me because I do read at 3x speed. So that is a little less than 3 hours of reading for me. So this is my spreadsheet, and this is how I track how many hours I'm reading a day. I think that if you are a competitive person and like to challenge yourself, I think this would be a very helpful way to show that progress for yourself, especially because there is a little bit of a consequence if you don't reach your goal for the day. I set my goal at 8 hours because even on my bad days, that is pretty easy to obtain. I would say I read about 10 hours of audiobook a day. So setting it a little bit lower than what I know I can do makes me feel a little bit more accomplished and more likely to read more. My next tip is to go into books blind. I find that personally, if I know too much about a book, I will get bored pretty easily. But if I don't know that much going into it, I'm more likely to want to continue reading. That way I can find out what's going on. I will know a basic synopsis of the book. Like, I won't go in completely blind. I'm a naturally inquisitive person, so not knowing what the book's about makes me want to read it even more. These next two tips are what really helps me read the most that I can. And the first one is, if you find yourself getting bored mid-chapter, finish the chapter and then set a timer and be on the distraction. I find that if I'm forcing myself to read, my mind will wander and I will have to go back and reread my chapter or reread the section I just read. But if I finish my chapter, I feel more accomplished because I finished. And then I'll set my timer for, let's say, 15 minutes. That way I can maybe watch a YouTube video, I can get up and walk around, I can do whatever I was thinking about wanting to do without feeling guilty because I should be reading. So let's say I just read an hour of an audiobook. In real time, that's 20 minutes. I will probably set a timer for 10 to 15 minutes if I've read like an hour of audiobook. That way I feel it's kind of like half and half. I used to do this thing where I would read for a half an hour and then not read for a half an hour. That was really helpful for getting back into reading, but I find that after 15 minutes, I'm ready to get back into my book and I don't feel the need to keep distracting myself with my phone or my notifications or whatever. And this last tip definitely isn't going to be for everyone, and that is, if you feel like you're getting bored with a book, put it down and pick up another book. I sometimes will read two books at the same time, especially if a book's really long. Like the book I'm reading right now is 17 hours, so I will pick up a shorter book in between. Let's say I'll read 2 hours of one book, 2 hours of the other, or 2 hours of one, 1 hour of the other. That way I am kind of keeping it a little bit more balanced, and I'm kind of trying to finish the first book instead of the second book. I know that this can be a little bit difficult for some people, but I find that if I'm reading different genres, it's not that difficult. I am reading Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri, and last night I felt like I was getting a little bit bored, not because the book wasn't good, but because I was reading for so long that I just wanted a break. So I picked up a nonfiction, which is on writing by Stephen King. That way I have two totally different genres. I'm not going to get them mixed up. I find that nonfiction can sometimes be more of like a palate cleanser for me. So I'll read something fluffy or easy like a YA contemporary or a nonfiction or a horror or thriller while I'm reading a dense adult fantasy, trying to give myself a little bit of a break. So that was all of my tips on how to read more. I tried to find tips that were things that I haven't really seen in videos like this before, because while some of those tips do work for me, I find that this is what I do to make myself read the most. I will say I do carry a book with me all the time. I specifically carry a backpack so I can have my book. That way, if I'm anywhere for any amount of time, I can always just pull out my book and read. I think it's important to switch around what you're reading every once in a while. For example, I try not to read too many books in a row that have the same trope or take place in the same kind of area. Like, I am having a hard time reading the book that I'm reading now because I just finished the Daevabad trilogy and it's the same narrator. So my brain's kind of mixing it up a little bit. I should have given it a little bit more time before I picked this book up, but I didn't. So we're just going with it. I also try to alternate longer books and shorter books. That way I feel like I'm not being bogged down by these giant tomes. I can normally read a 10-hour audiobook in a single day. So if I feel like I'm not reading as much as I would like, I will read a few short books in a row, one after another, to feel like I've gotten a lot of reading in. If you do anything that you feel like makes you read faster that I didn't mention, make sure to leave it in a comment below so I can try it out. I always am trying to read as much as I possibly can, and anything helps. So make sure you leave a thumbs up and subscribe. I try to upload a new video every Wednesday, maybe a little bit more. We'll see how that goes. but I'll see you next time. Bye.